welcome everybody to this Contact and NNPCF joint webinar. Today we are really pleased to have Josh McAllister with us. Josh is the chair of the independent review into children's social care, and he's going to be taking us through the case for change. Just some housekeeping before we get into that. Please, this session is being recorded, and if you don't want to appear on camera, please turn your camera off. You'll be muted throughout the session, and if you do want to ask questions, please put them in the chat. If you're unable to do that for whatever reason, if you indicate to us by waving or putting your hand up using the Zoom functions, we can come to you and we may be able to ask, maybe able to bring you in for a verbal session. We have got a lot of attendees today, so we've over 100 people booked in. So I imagine that we'll be quite busy and interactive. And as ever with these things, I think we're all very used to the world of technology nowadays and all this remote working. But I'm sure you'll appreciate that occasionally we do have glitches. So if we do have glitches, please bear with us. Today's session is interactive, so we are going to be asking you some questions using Mentimeter. Some of you may have used that before. When we get to that point, I'll explain what you can do. But if you have your phones or mobile devices or laptops ready, that would be great, because that will enable you to participate a little bit more easily. We are still seeing people coming into the meeting, but we will get going. So, as I said, this is a joint NNPCF and Contact webinar. Today's subject is the independent review into children's social care and the case for change there. My name is Murunal Sisodia. I'm one of the co-chairs of the NNPCF, and you're all very welcome indeed. And without further ado, let me introduce you to Josh McAllister. Josh, over to you.
Thanks, Murunal, and good afternoon, everybody. It's great to be here for this session so soon after we published our first document as an independent review. Just by brief way of introduction and background, I'm a teacher by background, secondary school teacher. Worked for a number of years in the field of recruiting and developing social workers, mainly working in child protection. And in March of this year, began leading the independent review into children's social care in England, which is asking a big question, that is, how do we better guarantee that children can grow up in families with the safety, stability and support that they need and love that they need, and where that's not possible, that care can provide those same foundations. So that's really the kind of big topic that the review is focused on. I should say that it's not explicitly a SEND review, although I think a number of you, if you get a chance to read the document, and certainly when we give you an overview of the case for change today, we'll see that some of the themes really resonate with a SEND focused experience that you might have had yourself. We have had lots of engagement from carers and parents of children with disabilities, and that's been incredibly useful over the review so far. There's obviously a big overlap there, and those voices have been taken on board and I think reflected in the document that we published last week. I should also say that we've been working on the care review side in parallel with the SEND review, and we've got a colleague from the SEND review joining the session today, which I think is a good example of the join up that's taking place there. The review published a document on Thursday last week, so a week ago today, which is the case for change. And what we've tried to do, and really only in the first 3 months of the review, is work at real pace to gather the views and experiences of parents and children and young people and families and foster carers and professionals to say, what is it that's not working with children's social care at the moment? We've also sourced a huge amount of very good evidence in answering that question. And we wanted to publish something quite early on in the review so that we could share our thinking very transparently with people. and then pose a number of questions before we start doing the work of developing recommendations. And so that's really the approach that we've taken with the Case for Change. We're only 3 months in, but we've published this fairly substantial document which sets out the themes of problems, and I'll talk you through those in this session, and then poses a number of questions, and we'll come to those at the end, because I think there are some questions which for you as a group of parent carer forums will have a lot to add and a lot to say on those themes. So Marunal, if you could click us through. So that's the background. The review, just a bit more detail about it, is being supported by a group of civil servants. So it's independent of government. It's got a group of civil servants who've been seconded to work on the review, but it's taking a stand back position on how we do children's social care at the moment. We're being supported by an experts by experience board, which is made up of care experienced adults, some young people, parents, kinship carers, adopters, foster carers, and others. And the final review and report will be delivered in spring 2022, about 9 months from now, when we'll deliver the final recommendations to the Prime Minister and to the Secretary of State for Education and to the Treasury. So that's really the kind of overview. And as I said at the beginning, we're only at the beginning of this process. So what I'll talk you through today is really more about the issues and themes that we've heard, rather than any recommendations, because we're not at that point yet. Slide 3, please, Runal. Thank you. So the major themes that we have heard through the work that we've done so far come into 4 categories, and we'll talk you through these in more detail. The first one is that we're not doing enough to help families at the moment, that when it comes to the child protection system, it's not effective enough at giving support and intervention or making swift decisions where there's a concern. When it comes to the care system, when we've taken children into care, often it doesn't do enough to build and strengthen the relationships that matter most. Sometimes it can actually weaken those relationships. And then finally, there are a whole set of issues about the way the system works. And I think across a number of these, you'll see themes which resonate with the experience of parent carers. So let's dive into them in a little bit more detail. So the first of these, which is that we're not doing enough to help families. We can share the link with you so you can read the full 100 and odd page document yourself, but this will give you a good snapshot overview. Really, the issue we identify as the first theme is that most parents and families that come into contact with children's social care do so because they're parenting in conditions of adversity. They're raising children often alongside a lot of stress that comes from being in an abusive relationship, having an addiction, having a mental health issue themselves, on top of living in cramped, inappropriate housing, not being able to pay the bills. And so that's the circumstance in which children's social care most often meets parents. And the response that we have at the moment is to investigate first rather than help. And that has created an increasingly adversarial children's social care system where parents experience a sort of safeguarding approach rather than a supportive approach. And that is an experience which we've heard almost verbatim explained back to us by parents of children with special educational needs and disabilities. When you dig into that a bit more, the approach of investigation and involvement in family life is very unevenly distributed. So poorer families have a significantly higher chance of having their children on a child protection plan or having their children taken into care. In some areas, that inequality is really pronounced and really significant. And there are also racial disparities which are less well understood within the children's social care system, but very important, and we need to do much more work to understand those racial disparities. We look at the evidence around investing in family help and whether that can reduce demand for more intrusive safeguarding measures later on, and there is some encouraging evidence there. It's not it's not straightforward. And whilst I do make the argument that we need to invest more in family help, money alone is not going to be the answer to fixing the system and making it better. And part of the reason for that is that there are so many different definitions of family help. We call it early intervention, family support, early help, and actually we're missing a sort of clear definition of what is family help, what should it feel and look like for parents, and when should they be able to access it, and on what basis. And the review offers a definition of family help, which we wrote very quickly, so it is almost certainly not good, and we're asking people to give us feedback on the definition that we've got in the document. And then really importantly here, and I don't want to kind of these have huge assets and resources within them that the children's social care system doesn't make the best use of and can often overlook or ignore. So that the role that neighbours and extended family members can play in supporting parents raising their children in conditions of adversity is not a resource that children's social care facilitates making the best use of. It often either gets in the way of it or completely overlooks it. And that's something that we think needs to change. The second theme is more related to the child protection system. So this is the fourth slide, and that is that when it comes to making decisions about risk and harm, the decisions made by children's social care are too inconsistent and sometimes don't have the knowledge in children's social care to make the quality of decisions that they need to make. So we see here that, and whether it's the frequency and quality of supervision for social workers, it's really varied, sometimes far too infrequent and too poor. Examples from thematic reviews of particular concerns and issues, for example, sexual exploitation, where professional knowledge has been missing in the level that it's needed, and the sort of decisiveness and confidence around some decision making not being there. So we set out a number of those issues. We also look here particularly at teenagers, where there's a concern about that young person that's coming from outside of the home rather than inside of the home, and often where parents in those circumstances are as worried as the professionals about how to keep those teenagers safe from exploitation outside of the home. And what we've got at the moment is a system which is not set up to work. And you've got really hardworking, dedicated professionals working against the framework that they're in, with the police and social workers and parents often trying to fill the gaps themselves when it comes to addressing issues of county lines, for example. When we look at the family court system, we see that when parents have gotten into care proceedings, actually the intensive support that's needed to really find out whether or not parents are able to look after their children or whether a child needs to come into care, because that support, that intensive support, isn't available everywhere. We don't really know whether or not parents are able to change, and that actually delays the process for children, as well as being obviously really an unfair approach to giving parents a chance to raise their children, which is, I think, where we'd all agree is often the best place for children. When we do take children into care, we don't do enough to support parents who've had their children removed, and actually very often those parents will go on to have another child who might end up being taken into care again, and that's a really traumatic cycle for everybody concerned, for the services, for the children, and of course for parents who have that really awful loss of a baby or a young kid that they dearly love. So we need to think about this whole child protection system, where we put our attention and efforts, and the quality of decision making in that space as well. The third theme is about children in care and the care experience, where actually care can often weaken already really fragile relationships that young people in care have. A part of that is about the homes that are available for children in care not being where they're needed. So you've got children being moved far too far away from their community and their support network and their school, to parts of the country that they're not familiar with, that the whole way in which the placement market works is completely broken, both on a kind of commissioning side and also on the provider side. Examples of high levels of profit being made, very poor planning, and a lack of clarity about what the role of residential children's homes should be, because very many of those children actually only stay in residential children's homes for a short period of time, and then children either come back to their birth families or to foster care, and end up bouncing around the system without a clear plan for where it's best for them to grow up. The secure accommodation, so this is both secure welfare as well as secure justice homes, are a reflection of very siloed thinking across government and short-termism. And again, we see there the breakdown in work between different bits of government and different bits of services, letting children down. So they might end up reaching crisis point, being taken into a very expensive, quite isolated, secure setting for 3 months, where their education's disrupted, their relationships are disrupted, but professionals feel safe. And then after that 3-month period, the child is moved back into very similar circumstances that they were in before they ended up going into that secure setting. And the system, all of us together, the kind of way in which the professionals in it work, isn't clear on why we did that and on what the objective we were trying to achieve was. When it comes to getting support for children in care, the state is the corporate parent, but it is not a pushy parent for the services that those young people need, particularly when it comes to things like mental health services. And when we look at the important birthdays that young people have, whether it's 16, 18, 21, there is very inconsistent and sometimes insufficient help available for young people reaching those milestone birthdays, particularly 18. And then finally, care continues to come with a stigma, and actually leaves too many young people entering adulthood without the group of loving relationships that they need in their lives, that for those young people who are raised and grow up in birth families, have got the extended family network. They know where they're going back to at Christmas. They've got those quality relationships that give them a sense of identity about who they are, how they fit into the world, the group of people who are going to be there for them no matter what. Children in care often don't have that, and that changes everything for them. And that's a major problem that we need to do something about. And then finally, the fourth theme is to do with system factors, which I think some of this will really resonate with the experience of you as parent carers, which is where the money is being spent within children's social care has really shifted. The profile of spending has shifted towards crisis and acute spending, and away from more cost-effective help, which is low stigma and there for families when they need it. And as that shift has happened, it's become increasingly difficult for services to get out of that spiral of increasingly crisis-driven services. And so what we need is investment to rebalance that profile of spending and make sure that we can reform children's social care, make it effective. And we detail quite a lot of that in the document. When it comes to how services work together, accountability nationally and locally is often confused. You've got lots of different services doing different parts. We see this quite a lot when it comes to health and children's social care, trying to meet the needs of children with what are often described as complex needs, and struggling and sometimes failing to take collective responsibility for making sure that the support package is there for families who might need it. Multi-agency arrangements particularly let down teenagers, and I've talked a bit about that already, particularly between the police and children's social care. We've still got a system which is far too complicated, bureaucratic, and risk averse. And there's more to do to recruit, retain, and support high quality workforce. We've heard, particularly from SEND families, that social workers' knowledge of disabilities in particular can be very inconsistent, and that the way in which services work with parents of children with disabilities, whether that's them being allocated to a team of social workers focused on children with disabilities or a child in need team, family support team, really varies from local authority to local authority. And then finally, we have become very good at describing the challenges within children's social care system. There's been lots of reviews like the one that I'm leading before that have identified many of these issues, and yet we've still not been able to make the level of change and progress that we need to make. And we set out some of the thinking about why that is. So that's the big four themes. I haven't been able to look at the questions and comments that have been coming through as we've gone through that. So I will now take a moment to read those through and pass back over to Mrunal for the Q&A.
So what I might be able to do is help you a little bit there. As ever with our webinars, the chat function has been very busy, and I wouldn't expect you to keep a grip on it as you're presenting. But perhaps I can just draw out some of the themes. There's too many comments to go through one by one. But if I can just maybe put some of the big themes to you, Josh, I think that would be useful for your comment. The first piece up was raised by Fasila and Maureen, who had talked a little bit about, can you say a little bit about the coordination with the adult social care review that is going on at the moment, and the timing of that and the interface that you see between children's social care and adult social care, because that's very important for that transition is very important for children young people with SEND.
The issue of transitions is something that's come up a number of times, and one of the things that we need to do with the review's recommendations is think through how we don't end up with recommendations that might recreate cliff edges at 18 for young people where they might have been, and this is an experience I've heard many times, parents who battled for an assessment and access to a service that's been achieved, and then when your child reaches 18 and they age out of that service and need to go back through the same cycle again, which might often end up creating a crisis which costs services a lot of money and families a huge amount of stress. Now there is some encouraging noises, and we need to see how it's delivered, but some encouraging noises in the NHS long-term plan, particularly around child and adolescent mental health services, in having a transitionary period between 18 and 25 for CAMS support that's offered where it is offered, and I know that that's an issue in itself. That kind of thinking, I think, is we need to take that further so that we don't just end up creating a boundary firmly on the 18th birthday, which creates stress at a time when actually support might be needed the most, particularly as young people become more independent. In terms of the adult social care review, it is not a review that's being done in the same with the same level of depth as this one. I think that is far more focused on how adult social care is funded in the future rather than the service that's delivered. But we are definitely looking at transitions. That's a point that we're looking at.
Great. Another theme that's emerging is comments from Sarah, amongst others, around agreeing very much around needing a clearer definition of early help and family help. And we'll pause on that one, if I may, because we're going to do a little bit of something later in this webinar that may draw out some views on that. Quite a few comments around workforce development and training of social workers, sort of from Kay and Paul and Annette. Can you say a little bit more around your thoughts around that, and in particular sometimes the paucity of training when it comes to SEND specific needs?
Yeah, so I think there's been examples where recent developments have tried to be more precise about the knowledge that social workers need to have in order to be effective. When I started to do this work in 2013-14, the knowledge, the very clearly stated knowledge that social workers need to be able to know and understand in order to be effective, I think was quite weak. And there's been some positive developments over the last few years on that, not least of which is the knowledge and skills statement that the Department for Education has written out, which is quite pithy. And it says, like, here's the knowledge and skills that social workers need to be able to have to be effective. Now, what it doesn't do, and I think we probably do need to go further, is spell out in the next level of detail down at what point in a social worker's career and in what sort of role do they need to have a body of knowledge about a particular issue that at the moment the services aren't able to hold. And I do think there is a strong case that disability is one of those areas, and particularly where you've got social workers moving into roles in teams for children with disabilities. So that is something that we've definitely heard of so far, and the knowledge content that social workers need to be able to have to do particular roles is something that we will look at.
One of the themes that we've got coming through is around culture. There needs to be a change in the culture of social work. Obviously that's something you touched upon a little bit in what you were saying, Josh. How do you go about changing culture in something like this?
I mean, I think often social workers don't want to be doing the work in the way that they are being led to do it by the way the system's set up. So if I take one example, which is the sort of blurry space between an early help plan and a child in need plan and a child protection plan. When you speak to local authorities, sometimes the rationale for a child protection plan, they won't often describe it in these terms, but it is more or less the same spirit, is we've got some anxiety as a group of professionals about what's going on with this child and the circumstances they're living in. So we'll put them on a child in need plan and we'll monitor it. And what happens there is you then end up with an industry managing that assessment and monitoring process, which is very expensive. It sort of it self-reassures the system time and again that they're doing something with these families because they've assessed them, they're on a plan. And if things escalate, it'll become a child protection plan. If it de-escalates, it'll become early help. But when you actually dig into it and try and look at what the work is and what the legal basis for that involvement is, you go back to the fundamental principles of the 89 Act, the Children Act, which is Section 17 to offer help and support to parents. And that's what the child in need status should be about. And that does mean giving help and offering help, even when there is this concern that maybe something might be going on, maybe there might be a risk to the child. But if it isn't reaching the threshold of a child protection plan, our service is actually doing something. Are they offering help? Are they giving social workers the time to spend with families, freeing them up from some of the back office bureaucracy, freeing up the number of watchers that we've got in the system so that we've got more hands and fewer eyes amongst the social workers that are there. And then actually, I believe there's a way of achieving both a system which is better reassuring itself that we are actually keeping children safe because we're doing more to help. And it gives social workers the joy of the role which many of them came into the profession for, which is to actually get out and help families rather than simply assess and refer. So some of this stuff around culture is really deep, and changing it will take time. But unfortunately, the approach that we've taken to date hasn't made the change that we need to make.
The chat is continuing at the pace, but I'm going to move it on because I think that there are some things we wanted to go through. So I'm going to try and do something quite clever here. So please bear with me. What we're going to do is go to Mentimeter now. And for those of you who have seen this before, it's an interactive tool that allows you to really join in and comment and share in the presentation. Now, as a part of the case of change, a number of questions had been posed by Josh and the team that they wanted feedback on, and we thought this would be a really good opportunity for us to really get some initial feedback from you, and then maybe generate some discussion as well and some comment from Josh and the guys. So hopefully you can all see the screen that I'm sharing at the moment, which is Mentimeter. So if you can all go to www.menti.com and input the code 64149116. I'll say that again, 64149116. And here what we'd like you to do is just put in free text and comment and tell us what you think the purpose of children's social care should be. So I'll give that a few minutes just to scroll over. And actually, maybe whilst we're doing that, Josh, could you perhaps just give us a little bit of a sense of the sorts of things you were perhaps looking for or had in mind when framing this question?
So the reason we're asking this question is, as we were looking at the issues within children's social care, one of the recurring topics was people asking, what is the point of children's social care? What's it actually trying to do? And there are some real tensions between the idea of protecting children and supporting families. Those things don't always fit comfortably together. There are judgments that need to be made by a set of professionals about balancing the rights of families with the rights of children sometimes. And there are questions about to what extent is this a universal versus a targeted system. And so there, I think just 3 examples where there are quite fundamental questions about what is it we're actually trying to achieve here. Is this about support? Is the point of children's social care to strengthen and support families in order to care for children? Is it about providing services directly to children? Is it mainly about protection from harm and then leaving families to get on with it? Is it about offering widespread, broad-based, universal support for families so that they don't reach that point of crisis? So they're quite different versions. And I think as you go around the country, if you speak to different directors who run these services, they will often have different ideas themselves, which are reflected in how their services operate. So it's an important question. We wanted to try and over the course of the review come up with a definition which makes clear, at least my view, and then government can consider it on what the purpose of children's social care should be.
I think we're getting lots and lots and lots of feedback here in the through Menti here. Everything from supporting the whole family, from graduated responses to empowering and enabling families, to creating safe and happy childhoods. Lots and lots of really strong responses here. So please keep them coming. We will be sharing these slides and the output of what you're giving to us here, both as part of the sharing the slides back to you, but also with Josh and the team. So this is really great live feedback to some of the questions that Josh and his team have been looking for. So we've got the responses are continue to scroll. So you've got 58 responses already on to that question, Josh. So I'm sure that's really useful for you. Right. What I'm going to do is I'm going to try and move us on now into the next question. People are still going. I will pause there in the interest of time because we've got 2 more questions we wanted to get through, and a couple. The last one of those is multi-tiered. Up to 67 responses there. Right. I moved on to the next question. So hopefully your screens that you're using to input will also move on as well. So how do we address the tension between protection and support in children's social care that families describe? This is one of the really key things around that I think has been brought out, really, that I know that we brought to Josh in our feedback as parent carer forums, which was really the language we used was that the support not safeguarding.
Yeah.
Language that we used, and I think the language you've used is support not investigation, Josh. So if you could go to menti.com, use the same code. It should pop up, and be really interested in your responses at this point.
And part of the thinking behind this question was, as I think people have probably already picked up, that it's often quite hard for parents and social workers together to make sure the help feels and the support feels really delivered in partnership without stigma, when there's this possibility that it might be taken down a child protection route. And often parents saying that, you know, the threat of that being there means that when they push for things and argue for things and try and get services that they need, they get crammed into being seen as difficult, and that actually makes it more likely that they'll go down a child protection route. And so there's something here about how do we address that tension? So that's what this question is. So thank you for including the answers that you've already provided.
Just to draw out some of the themes that are coming out here. The first one is be very specific and separate the two out, and be very clear what is draw that distinction crystal clear. Another big theme that seems to be coming up here in the responses is co-production, actually working with families to really understand what they need and listening to what they need at the start of the journey. And that's a number of things that's come up a number of times as well, looking at these answers. Another thing that seems to be coming up a lot is training for social workers, actually just reposition what the role is and make social workers focus a little bit more on the support element rather than just the safeguarding or investigation components of what's being done. Again, those answers are ticking over. So we're up to 36 there, which is brilliant. And again, keep them coming, and we will share these with Josh and the team.
This sort of stuff is extremely useful, because when we put these questions in, we're not sure, are we asking the right question? Is it tapping into something that reflects people's experiences? And I think I've got some of my colleagues who are working on the review on the call with me, and putting these questions out for people that work in the system is actually very uncomfortable for them, because we have got a system that's set up in a particular way. Asking the question to you as people who are actually members of the public on the receiving end of these services, I think you can often get a kind of a really honest, free answer. So these are extremely useful responses. So thank you.
Great. We've got 39 responses there to that question as well. So I think that's fantastic feedback. Thank you, everybody. Moving on. We talked a little bit earlier, Josh talked a little bit earlier about the definition of family help, having a clearer definition of family help. And the language that's being used here is, early help, early intervention. I think all of us in the SEND world are familiar with these sorts of phrases, but this term of family help. Now, in the case for change, the team have posited a potential definition of what could constitute family help. It's too long to include in its entirety here, but what I tried to do when I was working with Daniel last night was try and summarize in maybe 3 paragraphs what the definition of early help is. So if I just read that out for you, for those of you who are perhaps working on smaller screens or can't see it, the key elements were: the aim of family help should be to improve children's lives through supporting the family unit and strengthening family relationships to enable children to thrive and keep families together, helping them to provide the safe, nurturing environments that children need. Family help should be high quality, evidence led, and delivered by skilled professionals who are able to engage families, building trust and supportive relationships with them. In delivering this support, family help should recognize that all families need help at times, and that does not mean there is a child protection concern. This help should be available to any family that is facing significant challenges that could pose a threat to providing their child with a loving, stable, safe family life. So we're already getting some feedback on that, but let me move forward one slide. The next vote for you is: what do you think about our proposed definition of family help? So give us your thoughts.
And if you don't like it and you're not sure, it'd be really useful if you could put any comments in the chat function about what might be missing or bits that you think have hit the wrong note.
Okay, those key elements. So broadly positive. Some, a few don't like it, and it'd be really interesting to get your feedback on why. And a few not sure. Probably need a little bit more time to think about it. It's a lot to absorb in a session like this. Please do go look at the case of change itself, because there's a longer definition there that's a little bit more detailed, which we're going to drill into a little bit in the coming slides. So hopefully we can tease out some of those things there. Some of the things that some of the comments coming back, maybe too wordy and complicated, too many words, don't like the word threat. Some of the language needs to be a little bit more parent friendly. So I think there's strong feedback in the chat there, Josh, that we can.
Yeah, that's all very helpful.
Feedback to you. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm going to keep us going. That's still ticking over, but we're getting the idea of roughly where the voting is coming out there. So they're broadly positive, with about a third saying not sure. Okay. In that longer definition of family help, there are some of the things that list some of the things that might be included in family help. Now here we've just drawn out 6 of those things that we thought were very relevant to families with SEND. And what we're going to ask you to do is rank those 6 things in order of importance for SEND families. So I'll give you a little bit longer to do this one, because it's probably a little bit more involved. But these are all things that we would recognize as being important, or things that are relevant to SEND families. Which of these do you think are most important for SEND families? So as I said, this one we may need to give you a little bit more time on. And as I said, there is a fuller definition of family help in the case for change. This one doesn't seem to be updating, actually. We are. Oh, maybe the technology is letting us down here. It seems we've had 11 responses so far, but nothing's registering here. Maybe this is one that only pops up when we close the voting. We are getting your responses. I can see your responses coming in. Up to 20 responses now. 29. Right, let's see if I close the voting. Does it update? Okay, that for some reason, my apologies. We're all still learning how to use Menti, but this slide doesn't seem to be updating for us live, which is a bit of a shame. It'll be interesting to see what the feedback is. We'll take a look in the background, and I'm sure there's somebody who's more capable at this stuff than I am, and we'll try and figure out what's gone wrong there. I'm sure the data is there in the background for us somewhere. Finally, a question on what shouldn't be included. What would you exclude from family support? What is there out there in the social work world that is really not helpful? Please give us your comments here. Panels, yes. See that updating live. So quite a lot here around people really don't like panels. People really are railing against parenting courses. I think that resonates with me. I spoke to one parent who had been sent on 17 parenting courses. And despite the number of courses she had, her child consistently continued to have ADHD and autism, and it seemed the parenting courses did not seem to address that for some reason. I'm amazed by that. Judgment, blame. So there's a lot of things around the culture and the stigma that you mentioned earlier, Josh. Negative comments. A little bit around one size fits all, lack of bespoke, poor co-production, not actually working with families, patronizing approaches, not including parents. There's a lot here around being done to rather than being co-produced with. A little bit around set processes stuff there. So really strong feedback there. Waiting list, guidance, having to wait for services. So again, really strong feedback coming through here. Cool. I will stop there. Still some stuff coming through. We've got 44 comments already. But what I'll do is I will stop sharing screen. We can go back to myself and Josh. So there's some really strong feedback there. Hopefully, Josh, you and your team will find that useful. A real almost pulse survey of some of the things that are exercising SEND parents most. And apologies for to everybody who contributed to that. One of those questions that we didn't get the results of. The technology did fail us there, but we'll take a look at what we can do around that. Hopefully, it's all there in the background. We're 10 minutes to the hour. We've covered off the things that we had today. Josh, can I come back to you perhaps to maybe close us out and maybe share next steps, and in particular, if you can talk to you mentioned the timelines earlier, but maybe talk to some of the engagement that's going to be happening going forwards on this, and your thinking and how you might link in with parent carers and the parent carer network.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you to everybody for contributing so fully to the session. That input and feedback's incredibly useful. This is actually the first, I think, big outing that we've had with the Case for Change questions since it was published last week. So really good to already start getting so many responses from people. I guess just picking up on a couple of themes from what people have shared there. I think this issue around services gatekeeping, which is about, to some degree, resource management, but also creating criteria or hidden thresholds. I think people describe it in those terms in the exercise that we've just done. Is a theme and a pattern across children's social care that lots of parents and families have described to us so far. And it's certainly something that we need to, as we're thinking about recommendations, make sure that we're trying to address through the recommendations that we come up with. And it's interesting to hear the feedback around parenting courses, parenting programs, support with parenting, because I think sometimes that being one of the few things that is available, I think services sometimes try and push families down that route because there isn't anything else on offer, even if it isn't going to meet the needs of a family. So I can absolutely understand why that would be unhelpful. So look, very, very useful feedback. Thank you. The next stage of the review is to take the questions that are in the Case for Change, a number of which we've asked to you today, out to a wider audience so that we can get feedback, thoughts and ideas from people. I think some of them will create some genuine debate and disagreement, which I think is good because we need to open that discussion back out. We'll be doing that over the course of the summer, so there'll be a number of events and opportunities for people to contribute to, public events that we're holding online, and we'll also be doing some in-depth work in a number of areas, with some ethnographic studies of parents who are on a child in need. We've got a child who's on a child in need plan or a child protection plan. Those are often experiences that it's actually harder for us to hear because there is some stigma around that, and understandably parents might be reluctant to come forward and share those experiences. So we're going to do some quite in-depth work looking at the lived experience of parents and children on those plans. And then we're going to start developing some recommendations based on the feedback that we're getting to the Case for Change questions. So the document can be read online. It's PDF. It's got a link at the very beginning of the document to a feedback form where you can answer one of the questions. You can answer all of the questions. You can also tell us if there are parts of the document that you think we've missed something or we've misunderstood something. We pulled it together in 3 months, so we might not have gotten everything right. Very open to the feedback that you've got to give us. So please do take a look at that. Keep an eye on our website where we'll be updating events that are happening over the course of the summer on particular questions that we're asking in the document. And then we'll continue, working with organisations like yours and networks like yours and other organisations, as we've done so far in the review, to make sure we're keeping respective groups in the loop as we're moving through the process, but also making sure that we're not missing anything as we move through the review. And we'll continue liaising with the SEND review at the Department for Education as well. So I think that's probably the overview, and I'm still keeping an eye here on the comments that are coming in, which is very useful. Summer holidays isn't a good time for parents to contribute. Sure. I mean, look, I think there is a challenge here, isn't there, about how the review addresses some of these urgent issues by reporting in spring next year. But also does a lot of engagement, and sometimes that means we've got to move quite quickly. But we'll make all of the engagement opportunities clear and advertised on our website, so you can see them there. And of course, you can contribute now to the questions that we're asking in the document over and above what you've already shared with us today, which has been very useful. So thank you for joining the call.
Great. So you can, if you Google Children's Social Care Review, Case of Change will come up. Please do that. I think Helen has also put a link in the chat although that's been consumed with the tsunami of conversation that's happened. Which is brilliant. So please do respond as individuals, respond as parent care forums, respond as regions. I think one of the things we do know is that everybody, each region, each locality has a different experience, and that richness is something that parent care forums and the network can bring. So please do respond to the review and input into it. I'm sure everything will be very welcome. And with that, I think we'll draw a close in the sense that we've had pretty much a full hour. I'll let you all go and have your lunch. I certainly know that's what I'm going to do. And there's not a lot for me to say really, other than say thank you to Josh and the team for coming to us so promptly after publishing last week. As Josh said, this is probably one of the first major stakeholder events I understand that you've done. So you've been the NNPCF and the Parent Care Forum Network has been quickly out of the traps on this one, which is brilliant. So thank you for that. Thank you for your time, Josh, and really, I think people have felt heard today. And the final thing for me to say is thank you to everybody who has come along today and participated, because without you, an event like this is completely meaningless. And I think that the input you've given today has been absolutely phenomenal. So thank you, everybody. So thank you, everybody, and have a good rest of the day.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.